It's time for Black and White, a show that wants to bring all of us together talking again. It's time to hear from people who only want to deal with facts. It's time for you to re-engage in America. It's time for Dan and Darrell. This is Dan Perkins, co-host of Black and White, and I want to tell you about a new service we are offering our listeners who have seen their freedom of speech taken away. We want to give it back to you. Join the conversation again by stepping on the American soapbox and tell America what you think about the issues that are confronting America. Join the conversation. It's free. Go to blackandwhites.us/America's Soapbox. The rules are simple. Not longer than 3 minutes, no attacks, racial or others, on other people, and no uncivilized language. Think about what is bothering you. Then get out your camcorder or your smartphone, write a script, push the record button. Check that you comply with all the rules, and if you think you do, log on to blacksandwhites.us/America's Soapbox and upload the link to your message. Check back with us in a few days and see if it's available for everybody in America to watch. Tell your friends and family to take their turn on the American Soapbox. I'm Dan Perkins. And welcome to this edition of Black and White. And joining us today is DeRoy Murdoch. He is the founding member of Project 21, a Black leadership network. He's a New York commentator, and he's nationally syndicated columnist for Scripps Howard News. He is part of the Hoover Institution on War and Revolution and Peace at Stanford University. And I could go on, but we were on a short time schedule. DeRoy, welcome to the show.
Dan, great to be with you.
We wanted to talk to you specifically. I've seen your work on CNN, but more on Fox than CNN.
Yeah, I've not been on CNN for a while, thankfully.
Videos of it. By the way, if I could just throw in a quick plug, DeRoy, this show, which is 11 weeks old, has a larger listening audience than the viewing audience of CNN during the day.
Isn't that something?
Unbelievable.
Yep.
In 11 weeks. We want to talk about critical race theory. That was our very first show that we did, was on critical race theory. And there's been such a change in the last 10, 11 weeks. Its resistance is breaking out all over the country. I just saw a video that just came across where a woman was at a board meeting, school board meeting, and was talking about she didn't want the critical race theory taught in the classroom. And the president of the school board gets up from the dais, walks around and goes over and rips the microphone away from her. Suppression of free speech. So can you tell us what the hell's going on?
Well, what's happening is that the left has pushed a really, really rotten idea called critical race theory, which basically says that if you're white, you are ipso facto a racial oppressor, and if you're black, you're ipso facto racially oppressed and a victim. And there's really nothing either side can do about it. If you are a white person who works, plays with, lives with black people, you're still racist. And if you're a black person who's educated and successful and prosperous, you're still a victim. And the racist white oppressors will stay that way until they die, and blacks will remain victims until we die. This is a sick, twisted, and horrible concept. It's bad enough if you're an adult and you hear this and you can laugh it off, but if you're a 8, 9, or 10-year-old in school and you're a white kid, you think, oh my God, I'm a terrible person. And if you're a black kid, you think, well, it's a rigged system, I'm never going to make it, so why bother trying to do homework or participate in class or try to be a successful student? And this is just a horrible, horrible idea to inculcate in the minds of young people in particular. And parents understand that, and they've been rebelling, thankfully, showing up at school board meetings, showing up at their principal's office, etc., and saying, look, we don't want any part of this. We don't want our kids being taught to hate each other. We don't want a system where kids in school are basically pitted against each other. And thankfully, you're seeing a real widespread grassroots rebellion against critical race theory. I think the left has taken this too far, and now it's blowing up in their faces. and they're very much on the run. The bad news is
Well,
that this idea is
I understand
more
that. I
widespread,
totally agree with what you're saying.
but it's
And I
the
understand.
news is people
I
are fighting
understand
back.
I'm sorry. Say it again, please.
I said that the bad news is that this idea is more widespread than people thought. The good news is there are parents and citizens fighting against it from coast to coast, and I think
Right.
it's very much on the run.
So let me say that I read a lot of stuff about critical race theory, and I understand the genesis of the university project that created the concept in the 1619 project. But what I don't understand is once it was in the colleges and universities, what group of people took it from there to the public schools?
Good question. I think a lot of these ideas start off in sociology departments, in racial studies departments, gender studies departments, and so on. And this sort of thing just sort of gets picked up on the intellectual left and gets carried forward, in part, I think, by the teachers' unions. They've been pushing this. Even against the face of this backdrop, the American Federation of Teachers, I think about 3 weeks ago in their convention, embraced critical race theory and said that they will, A, push this in schools, and B, I believe they've set up a legal defense fund to defend any teachers, principals, or school boards that want to push this concept. And I think you find that so many ideas start off sort of in the intellectual academic university left, and eventually get popularized by activist groups, by sometimes civil rights groups, and they just kind of grow from there. And they start in the big cities, then move out into the suburbs, and then eventually into the rural areas. We've even seen critical race theory popping up, of all places, in the Pentagon, where Pentagon Secretary Lloyd Austin seems to be on some sort of a jihad to wipe out what he calls extremism, racial extremism, which I guess is defined as any soldier or sailor, airman, or Marine who voted for Donald J. Trump or maybe is registered Republican. That seems to be the working definition of what a white supremacist is. So this is all very disturbing, and it's gotten way, way, way deeper into the nooks and crannies of American society, much more than people would have thought.
I saw Randy Weingarten, the president of the AFT, at her convention, making a plea that what we're really just teaching is real history. And I don't understand how she can rationalize that what they're trying to do with critical race theory, if it's a theory, can be history.
You're absolutely right about that. Look, I don't think anybody who's fighting critical race theory is saying, hey, let's not talk about slavery. Let's not talk about Jim Crow. Let's pretend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. never existed and the civil rights movement never occurred. All those things are part of American history. We should teach the good parts of American history, the bad parts, the ugly parts. And there are definitely ugly parts to talk about. But having an honest discussion about American history is very different from saying every white person is ipso facto a racist and every black person is ipso facto a victim. This goes well beyond saying let's have an honest discussion about American history into something designed basically to pit the white Americans against black Americans. That's pretty much what critical race theory is. So I think it's very dishonest of Randy Weingart and these other people to say, hey, we just want to teach all aspects of American history. I support that. What I don't support is with a broad brush painting every white person in America as a racist and every black person in America as the victims of those racists, of those alleged racists.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. You know, my passion I'm an author and a novelist, and among other things, and I just finished a 4.5-year work on a book called Abraham Lincoln and the Second Assassin, looking at the Civil War. And what I don't understand is that parts of our culture wanted and has continued to take down the statuary in the South because of Robert E. Lee or Stonewall Jackson or whoever it is. And they take them down and they want to get rid of them. Yet, isn't the best way to learn is both, as you said a few moments ago, the good and the bad of what's happened in our country. If you take away the signs and symbols that represent the people who did some bad things, how do you teach them? Only in a textbook? And if somebody else wants to write the textbook and talk about American history, are they going to be fair and balanced, or are they going to be bigoted? I think that one of the worst things that we did for this younger generation is when we started to tear down the signs and symbols of our past. And that to me says we're not teaching, and they don't really care about our history, because if they did, they would use it as a teaching moment as opposed to destruction.
I think you're right. That's one of the things I found really puzzling about this statue side, as I call it, these attacks on statues of Robert E. Lee and the various Confederate figures, Jefferson Davis, etc. You would think if you wanted to advance the idea that America is a racist, bigoted country built on slavery, etc., that the left would be the one saying, no, leave the statues of Robert E. Lee, leave the statues of Jefferson Davis, leave the statues of all those other people who owned slaves and defended slavery, so they could point and say, see, there's Robert E. Lee, see, there's Jefferson Davis. This proves our point that this is a racist country built on slavery. And yet, ironically, the same people who are saying teach the good, the bad, and the ugly of American history are removing symbols and proof and evidence of the bad and the ugly. So it is very ironic and puzzling, and maybe they just haven't thought this through fully in that sense, and they just have a sense of violence and destruction, want to tear things down for tearing down's sake, without thinking of the fact that they basically are erasing evidence of the very thing on which they want us all to obsess.
What do you think that there are people who are, quote, supporters of the critical race theory that have no idea what it is?
Oh, I think there are a lot of people on the left who don't have a lot of idea about a lot of things. I mean, I think some of them may be innocent people who think, oh, this is just a good way to teach the totality of American history. But I think there are a lot of other people there who just jumped on the bandwagon and think, great, this is the new leftist cause. Let me jump on the bandwagon here with my other comrades. And then I think there are other people who know exactly what they're doing, and they know very well that this is something that is left alone will tear this country to pieces, and they want to see this country torn to pieces. I think there are radical, far left Marxist, communist revolutionaries involved in this movement, and they don't want a peace in the valley. They don't want harmony between races. They want, ultimately, I think, a race war, blood in the streets, a revolutionary situation. And from that, they hope and they pray, if they do pray, that a revolutionary Marxist government will emerge and topple the existing American capitalist system. I think there are people involved in this movement who want exactly that, unfortunately.
We're about 12 weeks into this show, D-Roy. And when Dale and I, who's coming on as soon as I finish this, we decided that the freedom of speech was being destroyed in America, and that millions upon millions of people had given up on their freedom of speech because they knew if they tried to speak out about what they wanted to say, they would be classified as racists or bigots. So the America shut down. They gave up their freedom of speech. And we're trying with this show to bring free speech back by saying we want to engage in conversations across the races in a civil and fair and respectful way, so that we can share the ideas of both sides to see if we can get America talking again. When we started, we were told that it was a terrific idea, desperately needed, and maybe you'd get 2,500 people to listen to the first show. Where we got 400,000 people to listen to the first show.
Wow, congratulations.
We're now approaching 5 million listeners a month in 2.5 months. And we attribute that to that we're speaking and letting people speak without attacking them, like you have your own right. You have a right to say what you want to say, and we respect that right, and we respect your ability to say it. We may or may not agree with you, but we give you the right to do that. So we think that America is beginning to catch on to the idea that maybe freedom of speech is back again. And we created 2 weeks ago a program called, and we would like you to join, American Soapbox, where people can go do a 3-minute video of anything they want to talk about, as long as they're respectful and don't use any profanity or any racial words. Tell people in America what they think, and then we put them on a spool, and it just plays and plays and plays. So we invite you to go to blacksandwhites.us/American Soapbox and share your opinions. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my co-host, Darrell. You got it, partner.
All right, buddy. You know, Dan, this man's hot. He's already breaking critical race theory down. Now let's see if we can break down the insanity that we've been indoctrinated with. You know, do you know what? You've been an inspiration. I have to give you a lot of credit. I've done the research. I even heard you on Fox, and you make a lot of sense. The question I have for you actually revolves around people. Do you think the people of America will ever veer away from the word race?
Darrell, thank you for those very nice words. I much appreciate that. And congrats to both of you on this tremendous success you've been able to achieve in just a matter of weeks. That's very impressive and very encouraging. Will we ever veer away from the word race? Boy, I tell you, it seemed to me up until maybe 8 to 10 years ago, we were not forgetting about race or ignoring race, but it was racial tension and things like this were receding into the background. And it seemed to me that blacks and whites were getting along better, at least trying to. People are at least making the effort. And just in the last half dozen or so years, and certainly the last couple of years, the racial thing is at full boil. I'm 57 years old. I've never seen racial tension in this country like I see it today. And I grew up in the late 60s and through the 70s and 80s. And you'd think, being born in 1963, a year before the Civil Rights Act of 64, that I would have seen racism and racial tension and antagonism, as a child and as a teenager. Instead, I saw blacks and whites and everyone else at least trying to get along. And now, having had a black president for 8 years, not one but two black attorneys general for 8 years, not one but two black secretaries of state for 8 years, and so many other examples of black progress and black success and achievement, very often as a result of white people voting for black candidates and supporting black causes, supporting black products and companies, etc. That after all that, rather than coming together, we're just falling apart. And unfortunately, I think there are people who are very interested in driving blacks and whites apart and having us essentially in not a class struggle, but a racial struggle. They're just throwing a butane on that fire every day they can. And that, unfortunately, has us more focused on race than any time in my lifetime.
Do you see a time where education will become not indoctrination? I mean, we're bringing critical race theory. What's behind that? We have Mao Zedong hung up in schools in California, and excuse me, that's a socialist. We're Americans. It doesn't make sense. I can't fathom how we are allowing our American culture, I didn't say race, I said American culture, to be torn apart by ideologies, beliefs, and isms. Once again, those three words ring. And then you got critical race theory, which is ideology, isms, and now they're trying to make it a belief.
Yeah, this is all very true, and as you said, this is all part of the education system, and it seems as that kids are being taught critical race theory while they're not being taught basic things like arithmetic, like English, like grammar. I'm a writer, and people send me all sorts of documents. Hey, take a look at my proposal, look at my article I've written, please take a look at this letter to the editor, whatever it is. And I look at it, I can tell you that the grammar is just falling apart. Noun-verb disagreement, total abandonment of the subjunctive, many other aspects like this. And this is from people who graduate high school and graduate college and sometimes even graduate school. So you can imagine what it's like elementary schools where kids aren't being taught this sort of stuff. And instead of filling their brain cells with basic skills they need to succeed in our society, they're filling their brain cells with racial hatred and tension and acrimony at the expense of the basics they ought to be getting. So that's very frustrating from an educational standpoint, from a societal standpoint, from the standpoint of being able to exist in some level of peace here where we sit between the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans.
Do you think critical race theory has a place in this society?
I don't think it does. No, I as I said earlier, what we do need, and which I support and applaud, is a very honest look at American history. All the good we've done, from getting to the moon, liberating Europe and Asia during World War II, tremendous technological advancements, spreading the ideas of constitutional republicanism and democratic elections to all sorts of all four corners of the planet. These are the wonderful things we've done. It is also true that we had slavery here, we had Jim Crow, we had segregation, and we need to be honest and look at all those aspects of American history. What I don't support and what I hate and what I'm trying to fight as much best I can is this whole idea that white people are just almost genetically required or genetically programmed, if you will, to hold down black folks and other minorities. And other racial minorities are incapable, don't have the moral agency of doing anything about it other than lying back and basically being held down and essentially, if not literally, then figuratively asphyxiated by white racists. And this is the exact idea that critical race theory advances. It's a lie. It's a giant pack of lies. And it completely ignores so many examples of black, white, and white and black cooperation over the years. The abolitionists who helped push for the end of slavery, the North attacking the South, and I guess the South actually started. So the North responding to the South's attack in the Civil War, and ultimately defeating the Confederacy and defeating slavery at the cost of, I think, 380,000 white lives. The white folks who marched with Martin Luther King to put an end to Jim Crow segregation. Blacks and whites who worked together in the arts, in sports, in music, in commerce. So many examples of this going all the way back hundreds of years. And the people who promote critical race theory are not interested in talking about or remembering or educating people about black-white cooperation. They just want to talk about blacks being oppressed by racist whites, and again, the replacement of the Marxist class struggle with a culturally Marxist racial struggle. And that's what these people want. It needs to be rooted out like the noxious weed that it is, and it needs to be thrown onto the ash heap of history.
I've looked at the history of America from the beginning, and people forget that black people or the people of color, when they came to America, some of them were wealthy as well. Some of them had slaves as well.
That's true.
I mean, but I'm sorry. Don't tell the truth. I mean,
No,
that's part of our history, but we can't tell the truth. I can't. The biggest issue I see in this country is really, they started out with censorship, and then they brought us critical race theory, and then they started dividing us even further. I mean, not just socially, economically, but then they started dividing us by religion next. California, they were burning Bibles. Yeah, I mean, what? And what does this all achieve? I mean, if you take critical race theory as even a small portion of a whole, it's a small little portion, and you try to give it any substance to make it valid, it does not hold. And I don't understand how the individuals within this country, I'm sorry, I got the answer to my own question. Literacy.
Well, you're right. If you were literate and you can pick up books and read history and read original documents and so on, you'll see how much nonsense we're talking about with the critical race theory concept and other destructive ideas like that one. Unfortunately, if you're going through American government schools, there's a good chance you're not learning very much. They're not teaching very much. You've got, for example, in Baltimore, that we talked about the statues being yanked down. They spent a lot of time bringing down, not mobs bringing down statues, but the city removing statues of various Confederate figures back shortly after the George Floyd riots. So this would be just a year, about 12 to 14 months ago. So they busied themselves with that. What they didn't seem to focus on, which strikes me as a lot more relevant and urgent, is that I believe at the time there were 5 different schools, middle schools and high schools, where not one child was reading or computing at grade level. I don't mean 1%. I mean not one little boy or not one little girl in these 5 schools were able to do English or do math at grade level. That is an absolute emergency. And rather than focus on that, the government of Baltimore was running around taking down statues of the judge who wrote the Plessy versus Ferguson decision, I believe a statue dedicated to Confederate women. Now, if you could convince me that removing those statues suddenly made these kids able to speak and write the King's English and compute as if they were on the way to MIT or Caltech, I'd say, all right, well, maybe this is a useful exercise. But instead, what it is just a lot of noise, excitement, virtue signaling with no ultimate impact to make the lives of Black people, or for that matter, white people, any better.
My last question. If literacy is as important as we know it is, for this generation, we say it is, why is it that even with the critical race theory, the children of color are still left behind?
Well, I think a lot of that comes out of the government school systems, which I've described as, with some exceptions, but unfortunately it's too often true, as a system of organized child abuse, basically institutionalized child abuse. And you've got kids who are in these schools, very often Black kids, minority kids, in inner city government schools run by the teachers' unions, essentially. And these kids are being so grossly underserved because they're not focusing on the basics, reading, writing, arithmetic, but focused on critical race theory and all sorts of victimology and other nonsense like this. You've got failed teachers here in New York, for example, where I live, where if they can't teach, or in worst cases, they're not just bad teachers, but they're actually doing things like groping kids and engaging in inappropriate behavior. Rather than fire them, they're put in what are called rubber rooms. You sit in the rubber room, you're basically separated from the kids. You get your full salary as a teacher, paid for by yours truly and my fellow taxpayers here in New York City. And these folks are told, okay, just sit in this room, do the crossword puzzle, read books, put your head down and take a nap. There was a man who, I think for 7 years while his case was being heard, he basically was staring at the chests of young women in his classroom. And he sat in this rubber room with his cell phone and his laptop and basically ran his real estate business. He had several apartments, and he'd have the people go in and clean apartment 32 and please put new wallpaper in apartment 5J, whatever it might be. And for 7 years, this man's salary was paid for by yours truly and other New York taxpayers as he sat in this rubber room, not teaching any kids, and essentially running his personal real estate business. The New York Post exposed this and hounded him, and eventually he resigned. But for 7 years, he collected a salary from the school board and didn't teach anybody. And this is the kind of situation we have in way too many school districts from coast to coast. And as I say, this is largely a system of institutionalized child abuse. We need school choice, we need vouchers, we need charter schools, we need scholarships, we need all sorts of things that will help get little kids, Black, brown, and otherwise, out of these disaster schools and actually onto campuses where they might have some chance of actually learning something.
Roy, we have a 3 o'clock hard break and we're almost there. So I want to thank you so much for giving us of your generous time and your knowledge. If you missed any of this interview with DeRoy, you can go to blacksandwhites.us, go to the archive section and listen. DeRoy, it was a pleasure having you, and we hope we can invite you to come back soon.
Thank you. It's great to be with you, and happy to be on with you again sometime in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is Dan Perkins, co-host of Black and White, and I want to tell you about a new service we are offering our listeners who have seen their freedom of speech taken away. We want to give it back to you. Join the conversation again by stepping on the American soapbox and tell America what you think about the issues that are confronting America. Join the conversation. It's free. Go to blackandwhites.us/America's Soapbox. The rules are simple. Not longer than 3 minutes, no attacks, racial or others, on other people, and no uncivilized language. Think about what is bothering you. Then get out your camcorder or your smartphone, write a script, push the record button. Check that you comply with all the rules, and if you think you do, log on to blacksandwhites.us/America's Soapbox and upload the link to your message. Check back with us in a few days and see if it's available for everybody in America to watch. Tell your friends and family to take their turn on the American Soapbox. I'm Dan Perkins.